Don't touch me, Holden sneered, his voice slicing through the hushed luxury of the first-class lounge like a serrated blade. He looked at the extended dark hand as if it were coated in filth, then snapped his gaze up to the man's eyes. We don't mix with the help here, and we certainly don't shake hands with affirmative action hires. Security, get this trash out of my terminal before he devalues the property. Marius Ravensworth didn't flinch. He just smiled, a cold, predatory, terrifying smile. You just made the most expensive mistake of your life, Mr. Devereaux. The air inside the Meridian Airways Celestia Lounge smelled of white tea, old money, and the kind of aggressive silence that only the ultra-wealthy could afford. It was a sanctuary of marble floors and velvet armchairs, suspended high above the chaotic bustle of JFK's Terminal 4. Here, the clinking of crystal glasses was the only approved soundtrack. Marius Ravensworth adjusted the cuff of his bespoke charcoal suit. It was Italian wool, unbranded, cut by a tailor in Naples who only saw 4 clients a year. To the untrained eye, Marius looked like any other tired traveler, perhaps a musician or a mid-level sports agent. He carried no briefcase, only a tablet tucked under his arm. He was exhausted. The flight from Zurich had been long, and the negotiations for the acquisition of the cobalt mines in the Congo had been grueling. He wasn't in the mood for conflict. He was in the mood for a scotch, neat, and a quiet corner to review the final merger documents for his next massive project. He walked toward the bar, his gait steady and assured. He didn't look around with the wide-eyed wonder of a tourist. He moved with the ownership of a man who could buy the building. Standing near the floor-to-ceiling windows, checking his reflection in the glass more often than the tarmac below, was Holden Devereaux. Holden was the regional director of customer experience for Meridian Airways, a title he wore like a crown. He was a man composed of sharp angles and sharper insecurities, dressed in a suit that was too blue and a watch that was too big. He was currently berating a young flight attendant, Jolie Hale. Jolie was trembling. She was young, perhaps 22, with her hair pulled back in a severe bun that Meridian's grooming standards required. A silver tray lay overturned at her feet, a puddle of sparkling water soaking into the plush carpet. "It's not just water, is it?" Holden hissed, his voice pitched low but carrying a venom that made nearby heads turn. "It is incompetence, liquid incompetence. Do you know who sits in this lounge, Miss Hale? Senators, CEOs, people who matter, people unlike you." "I'm so sorry, Mr. Devereaux," Jolie stammered, dropping to her knees to dab at the carpet with a linen napkin. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely hold the cloth. "The trolley wheel, it got stuck on the rug edge and—" "I don't care about the physics of your failure," Holden interrupted, stepping back to ensure the water didn't touch his Italian loafers. "I care that you are a stain on this brand. I am trying to elevate Meridian to the precipice of global luxury, and you are dragging it down to the level of a Greyhound bus station." Marius paused. He had intended to walk past, to find his scotch, and ignore the petty tyrannies of middle management. He had deals worth $50 billion weighing on his mind. The fate of a clumsy flight attendant shouldn't have registered. But there was something in Holden's tone, a specific, curdled cruelty that triggered a dormant instinct in Marius. It was the bully radar. Marius changed course. He walked over to where Jolie was scrubbing the floor, her face burning with humiliation. "Leave it," Marius said gently. His voice was a deep baritone, calm and commanding. Jolie looked up, eyes wide with tears. Holden whipped his head around, annoyed at the interruption. "Excuse me?" Holden snapped. "This is a staff disciplinary matter. It doesn't concern passengers. Go find the buffet." Marius ignored him. He extended a hand to Jolie. "Stand up, miss. You are a professional, not a scullery maid. Accidents happen." Jolie hesitated, looking terrified of Holden, but she took Marius's hand. He pulled her to her feet with effortless grace. "Thank you, sir," she whispered, wiping her hands on her apron. She isn't finished, Holden barked, stepping into Marius's personal space. Holden was tall, but Marius was broader, denser. "And who do you think you are, interfering with my staff?" Marius turned his gaze to Holden. It was a look of profound boredom, masked by politeness. "I am a customer, Mr. Devereux, and I am telling you that you are disturbing the peace of this lounge far more than a spilled glass of water ever could." Holden's eyes narrowed. He scanned Marius, looking for clues of status. He saw no Rolex, no flashy logos, no entourage. Just a black man in a gray suit. In Holden's world, power was loud. Silence was weakness. He made a calculation, and, as usual, his math was fatally flawed. "I am the regional director," Holden announced, puffing his chest out. "I set the standards here, and right now the standard is that she is fired. Get your badge, Hale. You're done." "No, please," Jolie gasped. "I need this job. My mother—" "Mr. Devereux," Marius cut in, his voice hardening. "That seems excessive for a spilled drink. Perhaps we can discuss this like gentlemen." "I'm sure a warning would suffice." Marius, operating on the instinct of professional courtesy, a habit from decades of boardroom diplomacy, extended his right hand toward Holden. It was a universal gesture of de-escalation. A truce. "Shake my hand. Let's reset," and walk away. Holden looked at the hand. Then he looked at Marius's face. A sneer curled his lip, revealing the ugly architecture of his soul. He didn't just see a passenger. He saw someone he deemed beneath him in the social hierarchy he had constructed in his head. "Don't touch me," Holden said, loudly enough that the entire lounge went silent. Marius froze, his hand still suspended in the air. "I beg your pardon," Marius said softly. "I said, don't touch me," Holden repeated, emboldened by the audience. He brushed invisible dust off his lapel. "I know how this works. You buy a ticket with points, or maybe you got an upgrade because the economy cabin was full and suddenly you think you're peers with the management. We don't mix with the help here, and I certainly don't shake hands with affirmative action hires who think a suit makes them equal to me." The silence in the room stretched, taut and brittle. "Affirmative action hire," Marius repeated slowly, testing the weight of the phrase. He didn't sound angry. He sounded curious, like a scientist observing a particularly venomous insect. "You heard me," Holden scoffed. "Now step back. You're blocking the view." Marius slowly lowered his hand. He didn't clench a fist. He simply placed it in his pocket. "Mr. Devereux, I am offering you a chance to retract that statement and apologize to this young woman. I suggest you take it." Holden laughed. It was a sharp, barking sound. "Or what? You'll write a bad review on Yelp? I run this terminal. I run this airline's image. Security." He waved his hand imperiously toward the entrance, where two uniformed officers were already watching the commotion. Marius watched them approach. He felt a vibration in his pocket. His phone. It was likely Archer Harrington, the CEO of Meridian, calling to confirm the funding meeting scheduled for later that afternoon. The irony was so rich it tasted like blood in his mouth. "You really want to do this?" Marius asked, his voice dropping to a whisper that only Holden could hear. "Get him out!" Holden told the approaching guards, pointing a manicured finger at Marius's chest. "He's harassing the staff and threatening management. Revoke his lounge access. Hell, blacklist him from the flight." Marius looked at Jolie, whose face was pale with shock. He gave her a small, reassuring nod. Then he looked back at Holden. "Very well," Marius said. The humiliation was designed to be public. Holden Devereux didn't just want Marius removed, he wanted him erased. He wanted to perform authority for the other wealthy patrons, to show that he was the gatekeeper of their exclusive world. The two security guards, burly men with tired eyes, who clearly didn't get paid enough for this, hesitated as they reached Marius. They were trained to spot trouble, and the man standing calmly in the center of the room didn't look like trouble. He looked like the kind of man who owned the building the trouble was happening in. "Sir," the first guard said, his hand hovering near his belt but not touching his weapon, "Mr. Devereaux has asked that you leave the lounge." "On what grounds?" Marius asked, his tone conversational. He didn't resist, didn't raise his voice. He simply held his ground, a monolith of calm in a sea of nervous tension. "Harassment," Holden interjected, stepping forward. "He was accosting Miss Hale and became aggressive when I intervened. I don't feel safe with him in the lounge. As regional director, I have the authority to deny service to anyone disrupting the peace. Remove him, now, or do I need to call your supervisor and discuss your contract renewal?" The guards winced. Holden's threats were a known quantity at JFK. "Sir, please," the guard said to Marius, his voice lowering to a plea. "Let's just go outside and sort this out. Don't make a scene." Marius adjusted his cuffs again. He looked at Holden one last time, memorizing the smirk, the glint of triumph in his eyes. He committed the man's face to memory, filing it away in the folder of his mind labeled "Debts to be Collected." "I will leave," Marius announced, his voice carrying to the back of the room where a senator was pretending to read the Wall Street Journal. "But not because you ordered it, Mr. Devereaux, but because the air in here has suddenly become quite stale." He turned to Jolie, who was still frozen by the trolley. "Miss Hale, do not worry about your job. I suspect personnel changes are coming to Meridian Airways very soon." "Move it," Holden snapped. Marius walked out, flanked by the guards. It was a walk of shame in reverse. He held his head high, his stride purposeful. Every eye in the lounge followed him. Some looked pitying, others relieved that the confrontation was over. But a few, the sharks, the real power players, watched him with narrowed eyes. They recognized the posture. That wasn't the walk of a defeated man. That was the walk of a man going to get his weapon. As the glass doors of the Celestia Lounge slid shut behind him, cutting off the scent of white tea, Marius pulled out his phone. He didn't call customer service. He didn't call a lawyer. He called Peyton Knight. Peyton was his right hand, his attack dog, and the finest corporate strategist in New York City. She answered on the first ring. "Tell me you're landed and you're happy," Peyton's crisp voice came through. "The papers for the Apex Consortium deal are ready. Archer Harrington is sweating bullets in the boardroom. He thinks you might back out." "Peyton," Marius said, his voice terrifyingly devoid of emotion, "I need you to pull the file on Meridian Airways' employment hierarchy, specifically the regional director for the Northeast, a man named Holden Devereaux." There was a pause on the line. The sound of typing, furious, rapid-fire typing, filled the silence. "Holden Devereaux," Peyton repeated. "Mid-level executive, promoted 3 months ago. Nepotism hire. His uncle was on the board until he died last year. Reports indicate high staff turnover under his management and 3 pending HR complaints that were swept under the rug. Why? Did he lose your luggage?" "He refused to shake my hand," Marius said. "And then he had me ejected from the lounge by security. He called me an affirmative action hire." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute. It was the silence of a predator spotting prey. "Oh," Peyton said softly. "Oh dear." "I am currently standing in the terminal concourse," Marius continued, watching the frantic travelers rush by. "I have 20 minutes until the meeting with Harrington. I want everything, Peyton. His mortgage, his car payments, his performance reviews, his emails, and I want the clause in the funding agreement regarding reputational damage highlighted and sent to my tablet." "Consider it done," Peyton said. "And the funding? The $50 billion? "The funding," Marius said, a dark smile touching his lips, "is about to become very conditional. I'm heading to the headquarters now. Meet me in the lobby. Bring Kennedy Frost. I want witnesses." "Marius," Peyton warned, "the board is desperate. If you push too hard—" "I'm not going to push, Peyton. Marius said, hanging up the phone as he walked toward the exit, ignoring the confused look of the security guards who had just escorted him out. "I'm going to crush." He walked out into the humid New York afternoon. A black town car was already pulling up to the curb. The driver, a massive man named Tiny, opened the door. "Headquarters, boss?" Tiny asked. "Yes," Marius said, sliding into the leather seat. "And step on it. I don't want to be late for Mr. Devereaux's funeral." The Meridian Airways headquarters was a glass monolith in downtown Manhattan, a testament to an era of aviation glory that was rapidly fading. Inside the boardroom on the 50th floor, the air conditioning was set to a frigid 68 degrees, but Archer Harrington was sweating. Archer was the CEO of Meridian. He was a man of 60, with silver hair and an ulcer that was currently chewing a hole through his stomach lining. Meridian was bleeding cash. The fuel crisis, the union strikes, and the aging fleet had brought the legendary airline to its knees. They had one lifeline left: the Apex Consortium, a mysterious shadowy investment group represented by the brilliant and ruthless legal mind Marius Ravensworth. "Where is he?" Archer hissed, pacing the length of the mahogany table. "He's never late. Ravensworth is clockwork. If he walks, we're insolvent by Tuesday." Sitting around the table were the other board members, looking like a collection of nervous gargoyles. "Maybe he got stuck in traffic," suggested Kennedy Frost, a junior executive from the consortium who was already in the room, casually checking his emails. Kennedy was young, sharp, and terrified of Marius. He knew that if Marius was late, it wasn't an accident. It was a maneuver. The double doors swung open. Archer spun around, hope lighting up his face, but it quickly died. It wasn't Marius. It was Holden Devereaux. Holden strode into the boardroom as if he owned it. He wasn't supposed to be here. This was a board-level meeting, but Holden had a habit of crashing meetings he felt entitled to. He was flushed with the adrenaline of his recent victory at the airport. "Holden?" Archer asked, frowning. "What are you doing here? We are expecting—" I know. Holden waved a hand dismissively, pouring himself a glass of water from the crystal pitcher, identical to the one Jolie had dropped. "I just came from the terminal. I thought you should know I handled a situation personally. Saved the brand some serious embarrassment." Archer pinched the bridge of his nose. "Holden, unless you saved us $50 billion, I don't care. We are waiting for the Apex representative." "That's just it," Holden laughed, sitting in an empty leather chair. "The riffraff is getting bolder. I had to throw some guy out of the Celestia Lounge not 40 minutes ago, dressed up in a cheap suit, harassing the girls, trying to act like he owned the place. Offered to shake my hand like he was my equal." Holden chuckled, shaking his head. "I told him exactly where he belonged. You have to be firm with these types, Archer. If you let one in, the whole exclusivity of the brand crumbles." Kennedy Frost looked up from his iPad. "What did this man look like, Holden?" Holden shrugged. "Black guy, big, quiet, arrogant. Acted like he was doing me a favor by being there. Why?" Kennedy's face drained of color. He looked at Archer. "Oh my God." Archer stared at Holden. Did he give a name?" "Didn't ask," Holden scoffed. "He was nobody, just some affirmative action lawyer type trying to punch up." The heavy oak doors to the boardroom opened again. This time they didn't swing. They were pushed with a deliberate slow weight. Peyton Knight walked in first, holding a thick leather folio. She was dressed in white, sharp as a razor. She stepped aside. Marius Ravensworth entered. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. He was still wearing the charcoal suit. He still had the same calm expression, but the energy radiating off him was nuclear. Holden Devereaux was mid-sip of his water. He froze. The glass stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes bulged. He looked from Marius to Archer, and then back to Marius. The color drained from his face so fast it looked like a physical wipe. "Gentlemen," Marius said, his voice filling the room. He didn't look at Archer. He looked directly at Holden. Apologies for the delay. I ran into a sanitation issue at the airport. Archer hurried forward, his hand extended, desperate to salvage whatever was happening. Mr. Ravensworth, welcome, welcome. We are so honored. Marius ignored Archer's hand. He walked past the CEO, walking slowly around the table. The sound of his footsteps was the only noise in the room. He stopped directly behind the chair where Holden was sitting. Holden was trembling now, the water in his glass rippling. Mr. Devereaux, Marius said softly, placing a hand on the back of Holden's chair. It seems we meet again. I believe you mentioned something about not mixing with the help. Holden couldn't speak. His throat had closed up. Marius looked up at Archer, whose face was a mask of horror. Archer, Marius said, you have a funding proposal on the table. $50 billion to save your fleet, modernize your terminals, and keep this company from bankruptcy. The papers are right here. Peyton slammed the folio onto the table. The sound was like a gunshot. However, Marius continued, I have a new clause I would like to discuss. It's regarding the culture of your management team. Anything, Archer stammered. Marius, please. Whatever happened? Oh, something happened, Marius said, leaning down so his face was inches from Holden's ear. Mr. Devereaux here denied me entry to the lounge. He insulted me. He called security on me, and he refused to shake my hand because he felt I was beneath him. A gasp went around the table. So, Marius stood up straight, buttoning his jacket. Here is the situation. The Apex Consortium does not invest in bigotry. We do not invest in companies that employ men like Mr. Devereaux. Marius picked up the contract. He held it over the trash can in the corner of the room. You have two choices, Archer, Marius said calmly. Choice A. You keep Mr. Devereaux. I drop this contract in the trash, walk out that door, and short your stock so hard that by tomorrow morning you won't be able to afford the gas to fly a paper airplane. Holden made a small, choking noise. Or choice B? Archer whispered, looking at Holden like he was a cancerous tumor that needed immediate excision. Choice B, Marius smiled. Mr. Devereaux leaves, right now, without a severance package, without a reference, and he leaves the same way I did. Marius turned to the door and whistled. Security! The same two guards from the airport whom Marius had apparently instructed Tiny to bring along in the trailing car stepped into the boardroom. They looked uncomfortable, but obedient. Escort this trash out, Marius quoted Holden's own words, his voice ice cold. Before he devalues the property. Holden stood up, his legs shaking. You can't do this. I have a contract. I have rights. Marius leaned in close, his voice a low rumble. You have nothing, Holden. You lost your rights when you decided my dignity was negotiable. Now get out, before I decide that firing you isn't enough. Holden looked at Archer. Archer, please, I've been with this company for... Archer turned his back on him. Get him out of here, the CEO said. He's fired! As the guards grabbed Holden by the arms, roughly, far more roughly than they had touched Marius, Marius sat down in Holden's vacant chair. He picked up the glass of water Holden had poured, looked at it, and poured it into the plant pot next to him. Now, Marius said, opening the folio as Holden's screams of protest faded down the hallway. Let's talk about that $50 billion. But first, I believe Miss Hale in the lounge deserves a promotion. Don't you agree, Archer? Archer nodded frantically. Vice President of Guest Relations. Done. Done. Marius smiled. The game had just begun. Holden was gone, but the lesson wasn't finished yet. Karma was just warming up. The sidewalk outside the Meridian headquarters felt harder than any pavement Holden Devereaux had ever walked on. He stood there for a long moment, the glass doors reflecting a distorted image of a man who, just 10 minutes ago, had been a master of the universe. Now he was just a man on a sidewalk with no jacket. He had left it in the boardroom, and a security escort watching him with undisguised contempt. "You can't do this," Holden muttered to the air, his hands trembling as he reached for his phone. "It's a wrongful termination suit waiting to happen. I'll own that building by Christmas." He dialed his lawyer, a man named Sterling who charged $800 an hour and had handled Holden's messy divorce. "Sterling!" Holden barked into the phone, trying to summon his usual arrogance. "I need you to file an emergency injunction against Meridian Airways. They just fired me, without cause, in front of a client." There was a long pause on the other end. "Holden? Is that you?" "Yes, it's me. Start drafting the papers. I want to sue for $50 million. Defamation, emotional distress, the works." I can't do that, Holden," Sterling said, his voice oddly tight. "What do you mean you can't? You work for me." "I work for the firm, Holden," Sterling corrected. "And as of 5 minutes ago, our senior partners received a conflict of interest notice. A conflict involving the Apex Consortium." Holden felt a cold knot tighten in his stomach. "So what? Drop them. I'm your client." "The Apex Consortium just retained our firm for their global mergers division, Holden," Sterling said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The retainer fee is larger than our firm's gross revenue for the last 5 years. Part of the agreement stipulates that we cannot represent any parties currently in litigation against their interests or their personnel. They listed you by name, Holden. Specifically, by name." The phone slid slightly in Holden's sweaty palm. "You're dropping me? For him?" "I have to go, Holden. Don't call this number again. The block is already active on the firm's server." The line went dead. Holden stared at the phone. "Fine," he hissed. "I don't need lawyers. I have connections." He called Marcus, the VP of Operations at Pan Atlantic, Meridian's biggest rival. Marcus was Holden's drinking buddy. They spent weekends in the Hamptons complaining about union demands. "Marcus, buddy," Holden said, forcing a laugh. "Crazy day. You won't believe what Meridian just did. I'm free agent now, thinking of bringing my talents over to you guys. I know you've been eyeing that regional director spot for the East Coast." "Holden," Marcus said. The background noise of an airport terminal hummed behind him. "I can't talk." "Nonsense. Let's grab dinner at Le Cuckoo, my treat. We can talk numbers." "No, Holden, you don't understand," Marcus said, his voice hushed. "The memo went out." "What memo?" "The Apex Consortium. They sent a advisory notice to the HR directors of every major carrier in the alliance. It didn't say much, just that hiring you would be considered an act of hostility toward their investment portfolio. Holden, Apex owns fuel suppliers. They own the leasing companies that rent us our planes. If we hire you, they jack up our lease rates by 15%. You're radioactive." Holden felt the blood drain from his face. "That's illegal. That's blacklisting." "It's business," Marcus said coldly. "And frankly, I saw the security footage, Holden. Someone leaked it to TMZ. Don't touch me. Really? You sounded like a cartoon villain. I can't be seen with you. Good luck." Holden stood paralyzed as the call ended. He quickly opened his browser and typed his name. There it was, trending on Twitter. Holden the Hater. Meridian Meltdown. A grainy video, clearly taken by a passenger in the lounge, showed him sneering at Marius. The audio was crisp. "We don't mix with the help here." The comments were a landslide of vitriol. Thousands of them. People digging up his old yearbooks, people finding his address, people mocking his blue suit. He hailed a taxi, desperate to get to the sanctuary of his penthouse on the Upper East Side. He needed a drink. He needed to regroup. "Upper East Side," he told the driver, slamming the door. The driver, a heavy-set man with a thick beard, looked in the rearview mirror. His eyes narrowed. He looked at the phone mounted on his dashboard, where a news clip was playing. Then he looked back at Holden. "Get out," the driver said. "Excuse me?" Holden blinked. "I said get out. the driver repeated, turning around. I saw the video. My brother is a cleaner at Terminal 4. He works hard. You think you're better than him? Get out of my cab. This is discrimination, Holden shrieked. I will report you to the commission. Report me, the driver shrugged. But you ain't riding with me. Holden scrambled out of the taxi as the driver sped off, splashing a puddle of dirty gutter water onto Holden's Italian loafers, the same ones he had been so worried about protecting from the sparkling water earlier. He stood on the corner of Fifth Avenue, wet, jacketless, and alone. The city, usually his playground, suddenly felt like a fortress he was locked out of. He checked his bank app to order an Uber Black. Account status, frozen. Reason, suspicious activity, audit pending. He stared at the screen. A notification popped up from his bank. Dear Mr. Devereux, per the terms of your mortgage agreement, a review of your liquidity has been triggered due to change in employment status. Please contact the asset recovery team immediately. Holden looked up at the skyscrapers looming over him. They looked like tombstones. 3 months later, the Holden Devereux situation had become a case study in business schools, titled The Cost of Arrogance in the Digital Age. But for Holden, it wasn't a case study. It was a slow-motion car crash that never ended. The penthouse was gone. It turned out that Holden's wealth was mostly leverage. Credit cards, loans, and a mortgage based on a salary that no longer existed. When Apex's forensic accountants dug into his finances during the audit Marius had suggested, they found tax irregularities. Nothing prison-worthy, but enough for the IRS to freeze his remaining liquid cash. Holden was now living in a studio apartment in Queens, above a laundromat that shook the floorboards every time a spin cycle started. The room smelled of stale takeout and desperation. Holden sat on a futon that he had bought from Craigslist, staring at his laptop. He had applied to over 200 jobs. Not director jobs, not manager jobs. He was applying for shift supervisor roles at call centers. He was applying for data entry. Inbox, das zero. Every interview went the same way. They would Google him. They would see the video. They would see the articles. And the interview would end. His phone rang. It was an unknown number. Holden answered it, praying it was a recruiter. Mr. Devereux? A woman's voice. Cool, professional. Yes? This is Holden. This is Sarah from the Sovereign Bank Foreclosure Department. We're calling about the outstanding balance on your leased Porsche Panamera. You've missed 3 payments. I told you, Holden said, rubbing his temples. I am between opportunities. I just need an extension. 1 month. I have a lead on a consulting gig. We can't offer any more extensions, Mr. Devereux. The note on your vehicle has been sold to a third-party collection agency, and they have issued a repossession order. Sold? Who buys a single car loan? A holding company called Karma Capital LLC. They instructed us to execute immediate recovery. Holden dropped the phone. Karma Capital. It didn't take a genius to figure out whose shell company that was. Marius wasn't just defeating him. He was toying with him. A loud banging on the door made him jump. Mr. Devereux, open up! Holden went to the window. Down on the street, a tow truck was backing up to his Porsche, the last symbol of his former life. It was covered in dust and bird droppings because he couldn't afford a car wash, but it was still his. He ran down the stairs, bursting out onto the sidewalk in sweatpants and a stained t-shirt. Hey, stop! You can't take that! Holden screamed, running toward the tow truck driver. The driver, a burly man with tattoos on his neck, didn't even look up as he secured the chains. Paperwork is in order, buddy. Step back. I'll sue you, Holden yelled, grabbing the driver's arm. Do you know who I am? The driver shoved him back with effortless strength. Holden stumbled and fell onto the pavement, scraping his palms. Yeah, the driver said, looking down at him. You're the guy from the airport video, the one who doesn't touch the help. He spat on the ground near Holden's hand. Funny how things turn out. Now get out of the way before I charge you with obstruction. Holden sat on the cold concrete, watching his car being lifted into the air. A small crowd had gathered. Teenagers were filming him with their phones. "Yo, isn't that the racist airline guy?" one kid shouted. "Hey, do the face! Do the sneer!" Holden scrambled to his feet, hiding his face with his arm, and ran back into the building. He collapsed on the futon, his breathing ragged. He needed money, real money, fast. He had pawned his watches. He had sold his designer suits to a consignment shop for pennies on the dollar. He had one card left to play. He opened his laptop and composed an email to the Daily Mail. Subject: The truth about Marius Ravensworth. Exclusive interview. Body: I was set up. The video was edited. Marius Ravensworth is a bully who uses his billions to silence critics. I have information about his business dealings in the Congo that will blow the lid off his humanitarian image. I want $50,000 for the story. He hit send. This was it. If he couldn't join them, he would burn them down. He would become a martyr for the canceled. There was a market for that, wasn't there? 30 minutes later, his phone rang. It wasn't the newspaper. It was Peyton Knight. "Holden," her voice was like liquid nitrogen. "We just received a notification from our media monitoring software. You sent an email to a tabloid." How do you know that?" Holden stammered. "We own the ISP you're using, Holden. Well, a subsidiary does. But that's irrelevant. I'm calling to give you a friendly warning. I'm going to expose him," Holden shouted, finding a shred of courage in his desperation. "I know about the cobalt mines. I know he's not a saint." "The cobalt mines?" Peyton laughed, a dry, humorless sound. "The mines where Marius just negotiated a historic labor contract that tripled the wages of the local miners and built 3 schools and a hospital? That story breaks tomorrow in the New York Times. If you try to sell a slanderous lie, Holden, we won't just sue you for money you don't have. We will file criminal charges for corporate espionage and extortion. We recorded this call, by the way." Holden went silent. "Here is the reality," Peyton continued. "You are done fighting. You lost. The only choice you have left is whether you want to be poor and free or poor and in prison. Marius doesn't care which." "What do you want from me?" Holden whispered, tears streaming down his face. "I have nothing left. You took my job, my home, my car. What else is there?" "Your pride," Peyton said simply. "We want the last of it. Stop emailing. Stop talking. Go find a job, Holden, a real job. Start from the bottom. Maybe you'll learn something." The line clicked dead. Holden stared at the wall. The email to the tabloid sat in his sent folder. He slowly moved the cursor and deleted it. Then he went to the trash folder and deleted it forever. He curled into a ball on the futon. The hunger in his belly was sharp, but the hollowness in his chest was worse. He realized with terrifying clarity that he was no longer the protagonist of his own life. He was just a footnote in someone else's victory. 8 months had passed. Winter had settled over New York, turning the slush in the streets to gray ice. Holden Devereux adjusted his bow tie. It was a clip-on. The white shirt was polyester and chafed his neck. He looked at himself in the cracked mirror of the staff locker room. He looked older. The arrogant smoothness of his face had been replaced by gaunt lines of exhaustion. His hair was thinning and he couldn't afford the expensive treatments to hide it anymore. He was working for Prestige Catering, a company that serviced high-end corporate events. It was the only place that hadn't Googled him, mostly because the manager was a chaotic alcoholic who needed bodies to carry trays. "Devereux!" the shift captain yelled. "Stop admiring yourself. We're on in 5. Trays up. This is a VVIP event. Don't screw it up. No eye contact unless spoken to. Keep the champagne flutes full. If you drop anything, you're paying for it out of your tips." "Yes, chef," Holden mumbled, grabbing a heavy silver tray laden with crystal flutes. The irony was not lost on him. He was literally the help. He was the invisible machinery that he used to ignore. They marched out of the kitchen and into the venue. It was the grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel. The room was a sea of gold light, expensive flowers, and people who smelled like success. Holden moved through the crowd offering champagne. His back ached. His feet, clad in cheap rubber-soled shoes, were throbbing. "Champagne, sir?" he asked a man in a tuxedo. The man took a glass without looking at him. "Thanks." Holden moved on. He kept his head down, terrified someone would recognize him. But nobody did. To them, he was furniture. He was a delivery mechanism for alcohol. He reached the center of the room, where a large stage was set up. A banner hung above it. The Meridian Airways and Apex Consortium Gala, a new era of flight. Holden froze. He hadn't checked the client name. He just went where the agency sent him. He turned to flee, to run back to the kitchen and hide, but the crowd shifted, boxing him in. The lights dimmed. A spotlight hit the stage. Archer Harrington walked out to applause. He looked healthier, happier. "Ladies and gentlemen," Archer boomed. "A year ago, Meridian was on the brink. Tonight we are posting record profits. We have the newest fleet in the sky. We have the highest employee satisfaction rating in the industry, and it is all thanks to the vision of one man. Please welcome our chairman, Marius Ravensworth." The applause was thunderous. Marius walked onto the stage. He looked exactly the same, calm, powerful, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Holden's entire life earnings over the next 10 years. Holden tried to shrink into the shadows of a large fern, but he was stuck. "Thank you," Marius said, his deep voice silencing the room. "We built this success on a simple principle: dignity. The dignity of our passengers, and more importantly, the dignity of our staff. Because you cannot offer luxury if you do not offer respect." The crowd cheered. Holden felt like vomiting. "I would like to invite my partner in this transformation to the stage," Marius continued. "The woman who revolutionized our guest experience, the new Vice President of Customer Experience, Jolie Hale." Holden's tray shook. The glasses clinked together. Jolie walked onto the stage. She was radiant. The nervous, trembling girl from the lounge was gone. She wore an emerald evening gown, her head held high, radiating confidence and grace. She hugged Marius and took the microphone. "Thank you, Marius," she said, her voice steady. "A year ago, I was on my knees scrubbing a carpet, afraid for my job because of a mistake. Today, I lead a team of 10,000 people. We learned that mistakes aren't failures. They are opportunities to be better." Holden watched her. He remembered her face when he had screamed at her. He remembered the power he felt making her cry. Now she was up there, and he was down here, holding a tray of drinks for people who wouldn't spit on him if he was on fire. The speeches ended, and the crowd mingled. Holden tried to weave his way toward the exit, his shift be damned. He couldn't be here. "Waiter?" A voice stopped him. It was close. Too close. Holden froze. He knew that voice. He turned slowly. Marius Ravensworth was standing there. Next to him was Jolie. And flanking them was Peyton Knight. Marius was looking directly at him. There was no shock in his eyes. No surprise. Marius knew. He probably knew the moment the catering list was finalized. "I believe," Marius said, his face unreadable, "that the lady would like a water. Sparkling. With lime." Holden stood there, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. He looked at Jolie. She was looking at him, not with anger and not with fear. She looked at him with pity. Pure, devastating pity. "Holden," she said softly. Holden's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "The water," Marius prompted gently, but with a steel edge. "And be careful with the tray. We wouldn't want an accident." Holden's hands were shaking violently now. The trauma of the last year, the hunger, the humiliation, it all crashed down on him. He wasn't the regional director. He wasn't a victim. He was a server. "Yes," Holden whispered, his voice cracking. Yes, sir. He reached for a bottle of sparkling water on his tray. His hand shook so much he almost dropped it. He poured it into a fresh glass. He added a lime wedge with tongs. He held the glass out to Jolie. Here you go, ma'am, Holden said, looking at his shoes. I'm sorry. He didn't know why he said it. It just fell out of him. Jolie took the glass. Thank you, Holden. Marius stepped closer. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a bill, a $100 bill. He placed it on Holden's tray. For the service, Marius said. Work hard, keep your head down, and maybe one day you'll earn your way back to a handshake. Marius turned his back on him. Come, Jolie, let's go meet the senator. They walked away, leaving Holden standing alone in the middle of the ballroom, clutching a silver tray with a $100 bill staring up at him, a tip from the man he had once called trash. Holden looked at the money. He wanted to tear it up. He wanted to throw it. But he couldn't. He needed it for rent. He slowly, shamefully slid the bill into his pocket and turned to find someone else who needed a drink. The $100 bill Marius had placed on the silver tray didn't go to rent. It didn't go to food. In Holden's fractured mind, that money wasn't a tip. It was seed capital. It was an insult that he would transmute into a weapon. Holden had been fired from Prestige Catering 10 minutes after the gala ended. The shift captain had found him hiding in the service corridor, weeping uncontrollably, and had escorted him out the back door. Now, sitting in an all-night internet cafe in Queens, surrounded by teenagers playing video games and the hum of cooling fans, Holden was manic. He was convinced that Marius Ravensworth was not clean. No one accumulated $50 billion without burying bodies, metaphorically or otherwise. The Cobalt Mine story had been a PR masterstroke, but Holden believed there had to be something else, a shell company, a bribe, a weakness. He used the $100 to pay for a subscription to a shady data brokering site on the dark web, a resource he had heard about from a paranoid ex-colleague years ago. He spent the next 48 hours awake, fueled by cheap energy drinks and pure hatred, scouring the digital abyss for the name Apex Consortium. He found nothing. The company was a fortress, but then at 4 a.m. on the second day, he found a thread. It wasn't about Marius. It was about Meridian Airways. He uncovered a buried maintenance log from 3 years ago, back when Holden was just a mid-level manager. It detailed a recurring issue with the landing gear hydraulics on the fleet's flagship 787s. The logs showed that the repairs had been deferred to save costs. The authorization signature at the bottom of the deferral order was digital, encrypted, but the timestamp aligned perfectly with Holden's tenure as the Director of Operations Support. Holden stared at the screen. He didn't remember signing that. He had signed thousands of documents. But if he could prove that current management was still deferring these repairs, he could blow the whistle. He could claim that Marius's new luxury fleet was actually a ticking time bomb. He could destroy the brand's safety rating overnight. He didn't care if it was true. He just needed it to look true enough to short the stock. "I've got you," Holden whispered, his eyes bloodshot and wide. "I'll burn the whole airline down if I have to." He downloaded the files to a USB drive. He didn't go to the press. He had learned that lesson with Peyton Knight. He decided to go to the Federal Aviation Administration, FAA. But first, he needed to get inside the terminal. He needed to plant the USB drive on a server in the maintenance hangar to make it look like an internal leak from a current employee. It was insane. It was criminal. But Holden wasn't thinking like a rational man anymore. He was thinking like a suicide bomber. He still had his old security badge. It had been deactivated, obviously, but he knew the shift change patterns at the employee entrance of Terminal 4. He knew that if you walked in with a heavy box and looked annoyed, the tired guards often waved you through without scanning, assuming the badge reader was just lagging. Dressed in a stolen mechanic's jumpsuit he'd swiped from a laundromat dryer, Holden Devereux took the subway to JFK. He was going back to the scene of the crime. The terminal was gleaming. Marius's investment was visible everywhere. New lighting, fresh carpets, smiling staff. It made Holden sick. He navigated the back corridors, his heart hammering against his ribs like a sledgehammer. He reached the server room for the maintenance department. He reached for the door handle. It was unlocked. Too easy, a voice in his head warned. But he pushed it open. The room was dark, illuminated only by the blinking LEDs of the server racks. Holden rushed to the main console, plugging in his USB drive. "Upload!" he hissed, tapping the keys. "Come on, upload!" Suddenly the lights in the room flared on, blindingly bright white. Holden spun around. Sitting in a chair in the corner, legs crossed, was Peyton Knight. Next to her stood the massive figure of Tiny, Marius's driver. And leaning against the door frame, looking disappointed rather than angry, was Marius Ravensworth. "We were wondering when you'd show up," Marius said calmly. Holden backed up against the server rack, clutching the USB drive to his chest like a holy relic. You can't stop me! I have the evidence! I know about the hydraulic deferrals! I'm going to the FAA!" Peyton Knight laughed. It was a genuine laugh this time, filled with disbelief. She tapped a folder on her lap. "The hydraulic deferrals?" Peyton asked. "You mean the ones from 3 years ago? The ones you authorized to save your department 4% on the quarterly budget so you could secure your bonus?" I didn't," Holden stammered. "Oh, but you did," Marius said, standing up and walking slowly toward him. "We found those logs during our due diligence, Holden. We fixed the hydraulics in the first week of the takeover. It cost us $12 million to clean up your mess. The fleet is safe. The only thing that USB drive proves is your own gross negligence." Holden's knees buckled. The weapon he had brought was actually a confession. "Then why?" Holden whispered, sliding down the server rack to the floor. "Why did you leave the door unlocked? Why are you here?" "Because we track the dark web too, Holden," Peyton said, closing her folder. "We saw your purchase. We saw the search queries. We knew you were coming. We could have had the police waiting. We could have let you upload the file and then arrested you for cyberterrorism. You'd be looking at 20 years in federal prison." "But I'm not calling the police," Marius said, crouching down so he was eye level with Holden. Holden looked up, confusion warring with terror. "Why?" "Because prison is too easy," Marius said softly. "In prison, you can play the victim. You can tell yourself you were martyred by the powerful. You can sit in a cell and rot in your own bitterness." Marius reached out and gently took the USB drive from Holden's trembling hand. He crushed it in his fist, the plastic snapping with a sharp crack. "I want something else from you," Marius said. "I have nothing," Holden screamed, tears streaking the grime on his face. "I have no money. I have no home. I am eating out of trash cans. What more can you possibly take?" "I don't want to take anything," Marius said. "I want to give you something. I want to give you a job." Holden froze. The room went silent. Tiny shifted his weight by the door. A job?" Holden choked out. "Yes." Marius stood up and dusted off his suit. "You see, Holden, I believe in rehabilitation. I believe that even the most broken, arrogant machinery can be fixed if you strip it down to the parts and rebuild it." Marius gestured to the door. "This terminal is my pride and joy. But it gets dirty. High traffic, spills, trash. We have a vacancy on the custodial staff. Night shift, 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. Minimum wage, no benefits for the first 6 months." Holden stared at him. "You want me to be a janitor? Here? Where everyone knows me?" "No one knows you, Holden," Marius corrected him coldishly. "They knew the suit. They knew the title. They don't know the man. And frankly, the man right now is worth less than the gum on the bottom of a shoe." Marius leaned in close. "Here is the deal. You take the job. You scrub the floors. You clean the toilets in the first-class lounge you used to ban people from. You work hard. You treat every single passenger and staff member with the respect you refuse to give me. If you do that, I won't turn over the evidence of your negligence to the FAA. I won't send you to prison for the safety violations you signed off on years ago." "And if I refuse?" Holden asked, his voice trembling. "Then Tiny calls the FBI," Marius said simply, "and you spend the rest of your life in a cage." Holden looked at the door. He looked at Peyton, who was checking her watch. He looked at Marius, who offered no pity, only a cold, hard path to redemption. Holden looked at his hands. They were dirty, scarred, and empty. "I'll take the mop," Holden whispered. 5 years passed. JFK Terminal 4 had won the World's Best Terminal Award 3 years in a row. The Celestia Lounge was legendary. The staff were the highest paid in the industry, and the culture of Meridian Airways was studied by corporations globally. It was 2 a.m. on a Tuesday. The terminal was quiet, save for the rhythmic swish-swish of a mop bucket rolling across the marble floor. Holden Devereaux was tired. His back ached in a way that never really went away anymore. He wore a navy blue jumpsuit with his name embroidered on the pocket. Holden. No last name. Just Holden. He wasn't the regional director. He was the guy who made sure the floor shined. He dipped the mop into the soapy water, wrung it out, and began swabbing a spill near the check-in counters. He worked with a strange, meditative precision. He didn't miss a spot. He took pride in the shine. A group of young investment bankers walked by, loud and drunk, fresh off a red-eye from London. One of them, a tall man in a sharp suit, bumped into Holden's wet floor sign, knocking it over. "Watch it, old man!" the banker snapped, not even stopping. "Cluttering up the walkway." Holden paused. He looked at the fallen sign. He looked at the bankers retreating back. 5 years ago, Holden would have screamed. He would have called security. He would have demanded an apology. Now, Holden simply walked over, picked up the sign, and set it upright. "Safe travels," Holden murmured to the empty air. He went back to mopping. As he worked his way toward the lounge entrance, he saw a commotion. A young woman, clearly a new trainee at the check-in desk, was being berated by a passenger. The passenger was a man in an expensive coat, red-faced and screaming about his upgrade. "Do you know who I am?" the passenger shouted. "I am a Diamond Medallion member. I will have your job." The girl was crying. Holden stopped mopping. He felt a phantom pain in his chest, a memory of a blue suit and a cruel sneer. He saw himself in that passenger. He saw the monster he used to be. He propped his mop against the wall. He walked over to the desk. He didn't have authority. He didn't have power. But he had presence. "Sir," Holden said, his voice raspy but calm. The passenger spun around. "What? Who are you? The janitor? Get away from me!" "The flight is full," Holden said gently. "Screaming at her won't build a new seat, but it will ensure that everyone in this line remembers you as the man who made a girl cry over 3 inches of legroom." The passenger blinked, taken aback by the janitor's boldness. I... "She's doing her best," Holden continued, looking at the trainee. He offered her a small, sad smile. "Take a breath, miss. You're doing fine." The passenger looked around. People were watching. The shame, the social pressure kicked in. He grumbled, adjusted his coat, and stepped back. "Fine. Just get me on the plane." Holden nodded and walked back to his mop. As he reached for the handle, he saw a pair of polished black shoes standing next to his bucket. He looked up. Marius Ravensworth was standing there. He had just come off a private arrival. He was older now, a little gray in his beard, but his eyes were as sharp as ever. Jolie Hale was with him, now the COO of the company. Holden stiffened. He gripped the mop handle. "Good evening, Mr. Ravensworth," Holden said, lowering his eyes. "I'll have this spill cleaned up in a moment." Marius watched him. He looked at the check-in desk where the trainee was now wiping her eyes and working calmly. He looked at the clean floor. He looked at Holden's rough, calloused hands. "You missed a spot," Marius said. Holden's heart sank. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll get it right away." "No," Marius said. "Not on the floor." Marius extended his hand. Holden stared at it. The dark skin, the immaculately manicured nails, the cuff of the bespoke suit. It was the same hand that had been offered 5 years ago, the hand Holden had refused to touch because he thought it was dirty. Now Holden looked at his own hand. It smelled of bleach. The fingernails were short and chipped. The skin was dry. "Sir," Holden whispered, "my hands are... I've been cleaning. They're filthy." "I know," Marius said, "but they are honest hands now, Holden, and honest dirt washes off. Arrogance stains forever. But you seem to have scrubbed that clean." Marius didn't withdraw his hand. He waited. Holden swallowed the lump in his throat. His hand trembled as he reached out. He gripped Marius's hand. It was a firm, solid shake, man to man. No titles, no hierarchy, just two human beings standing on a marble floor. "Thank you, Holden," Marius said quietly. "Thank you, sir," Holden replied, his voice breaking. Marius nodded, released his hand, and walked away toward the exit, Jolie smiling softly at Holden as she passed. Holden stood there for a long time. He looked at his hand. He felt a warmth spreading through his chest that he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't pride. It was peace. He picked up his mop. There was still work to do. And for the first time in his life, Holden Devereux was happy to do it. The downfall of Holden Devereux wasn't just a story about a lost job. It was a dissection of a lost soul. He learned through the brutal machinery of karma that the true measure of a person isn't the cut of their suit or the title on their business card. It is how they treat those who can do absolutely nothing for them. Marius Ravensworth didn't destroy Holden. He saved him by stripping away the illusion that made him a monster. It cost Holden everything to learn the value of a single handshake, but in the end, it was the only transaction that ever truly mattered. What would you have done if you were Marius? Would you have offered the job or let the jail cell door slam shut? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one. If this story of brutal karma and redemption resonated with you, please hit that like button. It helps the channel immensely. And don't forget to subscribe and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story that reveals the raw truth of human nature. Until next time, remember, be careful who you look down on, because you never know who is holding the ladder.